Mark chapter 2. We're going to take verses 1 through 12 and kind of look at those this morning, some different things going on with this. This is one of those accounts that we've grown familiar with, and that's always our danger with the scripture, is over familiarity. Sometimes we get so used to a passage that we're no longer able to see or hear it. So, Kendall, you feel like reading this morning?
I guess so.
Okay, well
There
you.
might be a word I don't have to say because I've already looking at it.
That's all right. Other than paralytic, I think you're probably good.
Paralytic.
All right. Well, go on ahead and read us Mark 2, 1 through 12.
And again he entered into Capernaum
Yep.
after some days, and it was noised that he was in the house. And straightway many were gathered together, insomuch that there was no room to receive them. Not so much at the door, and he preached the word unto them. And they come unto him, bringing one sick with the palsy, which was born of 4. And when they could not nigh unto him for the rest, they uncovered the roof where he was, and when they had broken it up, they lay down in bed wherein the sick of the palsy lay. When Jesus saw their faith, he said unto the sick of the palsy, Son, thy sins be forgiven thee. But there were certain of the scribes sitting there and reasoning in their hearts, Why did this man speak blasphemies? Who can forgive sins but God only? And immediately when Jesus perceived in his spirit that they so reasoned within themselves, he said unto them, Why reason ye these things in your hearts? Whether it is easier to say to the sick of the palsy, Thy sins be forgiven thee, or to say, Arise and take thy bed and walk. But that ye may know that the Son of Man hath power on earth to forgive sins. He saith to the sick of the palsy, I say unto thee, Arise and take up thy bed, and go thy way into thine house. And immediately he arose and took up the bed, and went forth before them all, insomuch that they were all amazed, and glorified God, saying, We never saw it on this fashion.
All right. Thank you. So as you're looking at this, we have some different characters here. The two main characters in the story is a guy who says nothing and can't walk, and Jesus. Then we have a couple other people on the side. We have the 4 guys that carry him, his 4 friends, and then we have everybody else in the room, in the house. How many of you have ever had to carry a litter or a stretcher or something like that? And I don't mean the nice kind with the wheels and everything balanced. I'm talking the unsteady kind where you got the handholds and you've got different people of different sizes. How many of you ever tried to carry one of those? No? None of my nursing people. Okay. I can remember loading people into ambulances. I'd grab a side, and especially on like lift assists. Lift assist, when they call the fire department out to help the ambulance people, generally means the person is so big that 2 strong people can't get them up. And I remember a few lift assists where I went home in extreme pain. Because I lifted my side, and the other people lifted their side, but they didn't lift their side evenly. And they about dumped them in the floor, and it threw my back out to keep the person from ending up in the floor. Because we'd already got them up out of the floor once to get them on the stretcher. And I didn't want to have to pick them up twice after they'd already messed up my back. You say, what does that have to do with this story? How many of you have been to the high school football games and watched the trouble they have carrying some of those kids off on the back of the golf cart and getting them up there and not tumping them? Imagine if you're the guy that your 4 friends have come to your house, they put you on a stretcher of whatever form, they're carrying you through the city. There's not much you can do. They get to this guy's house, and they can't get in because there's so many people. Now, if you've worked with people, especially people with chronic illness, crowds make people with chronic illness extremely nervous. Extremely nervous. I imagine the best the guy could do is look and go, wow, that's a huge crowd. Now, I know that most of those houses had either a ladder inside or they had steps on the outside that went up. How many of you ever moved a heavy object? And it doesn't matter which side of the steps you're on, 8 or 10 steps, and there's 3 or 4 of you, but you got to find a way to keep it level. Okay, thank you, Brother Tommy. Your head's nodding yes. That's not fun. So they get him up on the roof, and they rip the roof apart. Kendall, to answer your question, apparently, sometimes you can invade people's space. Apparently, sometimes. So if there's a need for a miracle and a roof to be opened up to invade space, then that's your answer. All right? That way neither you nor your grandmother win this morning in that argument. Okay? Now they've got to lower him down. How do you think they lower him down? Okay, I got to vote for ropes. Ropes would seem logical.
They got to have somebody down there to take it.
They might have gotten it down far enough that they could have reached up and grabbed it and handed it off. See, generally, Tommy, I thought ropes too. For one reason, right? Because that's what I've always seen in movies. And that's what everybody's always told me. They lowered him down. Here's my thing, though. How many of you have at least 50 foot of rope in your vehicle this morning? Okay. They carried him figuring they would be able to walk into the house. So I'm left wondering, did they take off their belts? Did they take off their jacket and tie together some kind of, like you see in the movies when someone escapes from a hospital and they tie all the bed sheets together to go out the window rappelling?
I think he miraculously floated down.
You think he miraculously floated down?
I thought they.
That's a
kept,
good hypothesis, but the word says his friends let him. So
I thought they kept water pots and whatnot already on the tops of the roofs in that area, and they would have some type of rope system to lower. That's why they had roof access to begin with. So
and that's possible, but you're still stuck with the question: do you have a guarantee that it was going to be there?
No.
Probably they just handed him down.
All right.
How far was the drop?
Well, I mean, ceilings for a long time have been between 8 and 12 feet high.
I think you could have made it if they dropped.
Especially in hot
You
countries.
probably had more than
Okay, so your interpretation of the word "let him down" was they targeted him and said to 4 guys underneath, "Y'all catch him."
Well, the Lord was there, I mean.
But the Lord wasn't involved just yet.
Well, I'm sure he had to say it time.
See, you say, "Brian, why are you going through this?" When was the last time you thought through this miracle? When was the last time you thought through this event? So this is our challenge, right? We get familiar and it's like, yep, they lowered him down, he gets healed, he walks away, it's all good. Right?
Okay, it says mat. You said litter.
Matt,
To me, a mat is something that can be rolled up and wouldn't have been stable enough to have carried him on the mat, but they would have carried his mat with them. I've always pictured them literally, toting him, chair style into the place. So it would have never occurred to me that they could have let him down on ropes on a litter, because I never thought about a litter.
okay, I mean, it says they let down the bed on which the paralytic was laying. So we know he was flat. because you can only lay flat. And they let him down while he was laying flat.
And then God transformed it into a mat. Stand up, take your nap, and walk.
No, it just depends on which translation. Some say bed, some say mat. Okay? Not everybody had nice, 12-inch thick beds to lay on like we do, with box springs and other springs and, a pillow top mattress. And for a long time, what we use as wall hangings now, those bamboo rolls or similar things, that was people's bed back in the day. That was, for guys that like to rough it military style, those bed rolls where the foam's that thick, Yeah, no, that's not fun. But that's, but as you think about that, now imagine you're the guy. Again, you're being lowered down. Obviously, you ain't moving much, hence because you're paralytic or you're sick of the palsy. Do you wonder if some rocks or some straw or other debris fell down in his face while they were lowering him? He said, well, that has nothing to do with the story. I think it has everything to do with the story, because sometimes we read the story, we read the account, and what? You read it as something that was back then, but what if it was something now? What if you're there watching it? Did you know homeowners get real upset at fire departments when they cut a roof in their ceiling to save their house? But the only way that they're saving your house is they cut a hole in the roof, and then they take a pike pole and they punch a hole in the ceiling so it lets all that stuff go out so that your house doesn't burn down. And then the homeowner gets mad because then, like 30 minutes after the fire department leaves, rain comes and there's a hole in their roof. And they're like, you didn't need to cut a hole in my roof. Well, yeah, they did. What if it was your house and someone ripped a hole in your roof to let down some paralyzed guy? What other things, as you're thinking about this, might be going on in this account? Put yourself there. I don't care which place you put yourself. You can put yourself like the Jesus guy. You were there teaching, and now a hole's being ripped in your roof, and it's messing up your teaching. For my teachers, for those who've been teachers, or those who've tried to teach seminars, how easy is it to maintain your calm when someone comes in and totally disrupts your presentation? Right? Or little Timmy decides that now is when he needs to run around the room. How many people that day, what are the expectations? As you think back through what Kendall read to us, what were the expectations that you see in this passage? We've looked at 4 different categories of people. What were the 4 expectations of people that day? Jesus, the man sick of the palsy, the crowd in general, and the 4 friends. Those are the 4 groups of people we're dealing with in this story. What was their anticipation? What was their expectation that day?
Well, I would think that the teachers and the people there to learn would be thinking somebody would be cut, the roof would be cut.
Okay.
You know, I don't think that would be a surprise when that took place.
So Jesus is there with the intent to preach. The crowd is apparently there with the intent to at least hear. Right? From every indication, this isn't a hostile crowd. Jesus is still liked right now. People still like Jesus. It's early in his ministry. He's in the honeymoon phase. Right? The first 6 months of a preacher are always the best in every church. Because everybody's on good behavior for the first 6 months, and so is the preacher. And then after that, some preachers are real good. They can make it last 12 to 18 months. Jesus is in his honeymoon phase. He's not saying everything like John was. We like this Jesus guy better than John. He ain't telling us we're a pit of vipers going to hell, that the axe is going to cut us down and we're going to be burned up. No, he hasn't said that yet. He will. But right now he hasn't said that. So this crowd isn't hostile. How many came with an expectation in faith? Yeah, the four. The four. Because notice what it says, right? The four came carrying him, and it says, when Jesus saw their faith, he says to the one that's sick of the palsy, he says to the paralytic, we have absolutely no idea what was in the mind of the paralyzed guy. None whatsoever. We know what was in the four friends. The four friends have seen enough and heard enough. And I say to you, look back in chapter 1, right after the apostles, Peter, James, John, and Andrew are called. They're just called as disciples. They're not apostles yet. The last time Jesus is in Capernaum, in Mark 1, he's in the synagogue on the Sabbath, and he casts out an unclean spirit. Then they go to Peter's mother-in-law's house, and she's been sick with a fever. And when you read sick with a fever, read 105-degree temperature for a prolonged period of time. What happens if you run, and in adults, honestly, most adults, anything above about 103 for very long? Okay, bad news. Her having a fever, this isn't like, when she was running a 99.1 and wanted 3 days of sick leave. No. The fever is such that when we look at the other accounts, she was not able to speak for herself anymore because the fever had incapacitated her so much. In a town like Capernaum, Capernaum wasn't as big as Lake Butler / Union County as far as population. Does word get around when some people in a community are sick? Yeah. Is it hard to believe that the four friends may have also heard about Peter's mother-in-law having a fever that would have a chance of killing her? And now she's up and just fine. Was a fever something to be scared of back in the day? Sure. If you don't know what's causing a fever now, is a fever something that you need to be careful with? Yeah, because true or false, fevers just randomly occur. Yeah. They're generally an indication of what? Yeah, something more serious underneath. If it's a kidney infection, is the fever something that, no, you don't have to worry about that. Generally, kidney infections are not contagious. But if it's something different, So the synagogue guy definitely would have been talked about in town. Peter and Andrew, being fishermen, being in the marketplace, do people talk about when their kinfolk are sick in town? So entirely plausible, right? And then, on that same Sabbath, when the sun was starting to go down and the Sabbath had technically ended and now it's the first day of the week on Saturday night, it says, then the whole city gathered at the door. They came to that house. They heard what happened in the synagogue. They all went home. They waited till the sun started to set. And then they just flooded Peter's mother-in-law's house with sick people and demon-possessed. So he goes, he does that, goes out that next morning, and he tells them, let's go out and preach in the region, because that's why I'm here, so I can preach. And then we have the leper. And we touched on the leper at the end of last week. Right? People have this idea, what? That it's more important to give God glory for all of his good stuff. But this guy, in giving God glory and talking about the good stuff Jesus did, was actually disobedient and made the ministry worse for Jesus. And it's always a good lesson for us. Do what he says. Not what you think is the good idea, but do what he actually says. So we don't know how much time has passed, but now he's back in town and people hear that he's in the house. What must have been the faith of the four friends? Because ask yourself, if this is all you've heard, and I'm asking you to think about this as someone who's not known the Bible for as long as you have, as people who haven't grown up around Bibles. What if you hear in Lake City that some guy went to a church service, had a devil cast out of him, and there were 100 people that witnessed it? That so-and-so in Lulu, that everybody knows in this region, that their mother-in-law was on the edge of death with a fever and they'd called 911. And some guy came in, laid hands on her, said, "Fever, get out of her." And she got right up and immediately went back to washing and cooked everybody supper, including the EMTs who came to carry her away. Thank you. You see, because you're used to the Bible, you read these and you go, how come some of these people missed it? But when I put it in the context of what I just did, so my question would be, what must be the faith of the fool? Because then, God forbid, now we change it to Gainesville. That they brought a field of people down into the swamp. And Jesus just went through, this fellow just went through, and everybody got up and was healed and walked out perfect. And you go, Brian, that's just more Gainesville foolishness. How many people might have that response just because of location? And others because, no, he didn't, no one walked through and healed a football field of people. Just no, brother. So when you look at the faith of the four that bring him, they're operating, and you said, well, some of them might have seen it. What's one phrase in the English language that would be good for the children of God never to utter again? I see it, but I don't believe it. Unbelief is built into the human condition by our words. Or someone says, well, I'll believe it when I see it. Well, it's only going to happen once. You ain't going to see that same event twice. So apparently you're going to not believe. But these four come on this sketchy evidence. And then the last one, a leper. How many of you would believe a story from a homeless guy that smells bad, that you know he's been a homeless guy that smells bad for the last 10 years? Do you take his word on it? You say, that's not the same as a leper. Okay, how many of you have seen lepers in your daily life like lepers were back then? No.
Only
Okay.
if you're in South Florida.
Okay.
What'd she say?
Say again?
Only if you're in South Florida.
Only if you're in South Florida.
If you're watching Dawn of the Dead,
Okay.
or his own movie.
Because most of the lepers back in the day went to the Hawaiian island that was specifically designed for lepers. There was an entire island in Hawaii that the whole island was designated that lepers could go there and live and be safe. You know? And you say, yeah, apparently, nobody wanted them in the mainland anywhere. So here's an island in the middle of the Pacific. If you can get here alive, you can live here. But if a homeless guy came up and said, here's what this Jesus guy did for me, would we take him serious? Is a homeless guy really a credible witness, or a homeless gal? Or are they just as untouchable in our day and time as lepers were? So when we look at the four, was their faith pretty astounding? Astounding enough. See, I know this about me. If I don't like the number of cars in a parking lot at a restaurant, I will leave and I'll go to a different parking lot, to a different restaurant. So, I've had my heart set to eat something and I get there and all but one space in the parking lot is filled and I leave. Not necessarily, Brother Dick. People can be convinced of all kinds of things, can't they?
Yep.
But you know the sign that I don't like when I see that many cars in the parking lot? I know they ain't got enough servers, and I know they ain't got enough kitchen staff. And there have been too many times in those restaurants, by the time my food gets to me, my fries are cool. The rest of my food is lukewarm, but my fries are cool. How many of you like eating cold fries? Yeah. So I go to the place where it's only half full, Brother Dick. And I hope I'm in between cycles. But yeah. Now I will give you this. In judging a barbecue place, if I see a bunch of working man's trucks at a barbecue place in the middle of the week, I know that's where I want to go for my barbecue. Because if working dudes will stop in the middle of their day and descend and eat good barbecue, yeah. Right? Had a person one time, God bless them, they said, oh, this is great barbecue. They took me to the place. I'd never heard of the place. And it was where, and I'd been in the area. And I said, oh no, this is some of the best barbecue in this area. And the brisket was greasy. The pork was mediocre. The barbecue sauce wasn't much better than maroon colored ketchup. The coleslaw, it didn't have much of the sauce of the slaw in it because it hadn't been cured long enough. He said, was there anything good there? The Dr. Pepper. But you know why people thought it was good? Now this is 30 years ago, because the brisket plate was $40. And so people thought because they were paying so much, it must have been good.
Emperor's new clothes.
Yeah, the emperor's new clothes.
A lot of brisket,
Do what?
a lot of briskets is greasy.
There's good brisket greasy, and there's bad brisket greasy. This is bad brisket. You know?
I need some of that gas station brisket from Texas.
Yes, yeah, yeah.
Stuff is good.
It ain't fine.
Yeah. But it would, I ask you a question. If you can't even get in the door, how many of you walk in and get that stupid little beeper thing so that you can stand outside and wait for an hour and a half? Thank you for nodding no, Brother Mark. I've been waiting for someone to agree with me on this. I'm leaving. Going someplace.
I haven't been to a place yet that I had to wait an hour and a half, that was worth it.
There you go. And he said, why are you making a point of this? Because put yourself in these guys' situation. They've been carrying their buddy, they get there, and the crowd is outside the house. There doesn't seem to be a good way. Do you go up on top of the roof and tear apart someone's house to help your friend?
I think one thing's gotta be considered here is desperation.
Okay.
A lot of faith is driven and drawn by desperation. The woman who, touched Jesus' garment, this leper who, came to Jesus, them people are desperate. A lot of people don't believe until it's the final thing that they can come up with, and they're so desperate, that they're willing to do whatever. Think of the nerve of a woman, I don't know if nerves are right, but to touch, where did that faith come from? That faith came out of desperation.
Yeah.
She tried everything before she tried Jesus.
Yeah. And what she had of Jesus was nothing but hearsay, because with that issue of blood, she couldn't go out in public.
It goes for our lives.
Yeah.
You let things get desperate. You let things, you go through, some kind of serious trial. And, boy, you can get real religious and talk to Jesus a whole lot, when things are going south. Or, let me say, I speak for myself. Times are good, and, I'm not desperate, or people aren't desperate. You kind of forget about Jesus a little bit. You don't really need him. But buddy, when I need him, I'm usually desperate.
And what you said is one of the key elements in faith. Okay? And I mean, while you keep your finger in Mark, because we come back in just a second and wrap it up. But look at James chapter 5, verse 17 and 18. And actually, we'll go back and we'll pick up the last part of verse 16. He says there, verse 16, he says, confess your trespasses to one another, pray for one another that you may be healed. The effective or the effectual, fervent prayer of a righteous man avails much. Is there a place for prayers prayed in anger? No, brother. No anger. All right, at least you nod yes, Mark. Because why? Look at the next part. Elijah was a man. Now, I don't like the New King James on this. It says with a nature like ours. That's terrible. It obscures what he's saying. Elijah was a man subject to like passions. Now, I want you to think about that phrase, like passions. When you have had a passion in your life that either you mastered or whipped you, and you come across someone else that has the same kind of passion, are you able to identify with them? What makes the fervent prayer effective is the like passion. But how many people been taught in church, you know, your prayer is supposed to be da-da-da? No. There's a time for prayer with tears. There's a time for prayer where you're mad, so mad you can spit nails. There is the time for the faith in desperation. There's a time. And where this comes into play with this passage is this. Don't buzz me till I tell you, Brother Dick, don't buzz me yet. Here's where this comes into play. Because so much of our life, our faith has been taught to us that it has to be respectable and even keeled and not be too high or too low, that the devil's neutralized our emotions where our faith is concerned, so that by the time we're in a place of emotional investment, the emotion that's taken over is fear. And fear kills faith.
God can stand anything.
Yes.
We throw at. He can stand our anger, he can stand our sadness, he can stand whatever it is, that we come. If you've never been, knocked down, if you've never been overwhelmed by life, probably hadn't prayed, like you need to pray.
Yep.
In my view, and what I've listened
All right. And then one other thing. As soon as Jesus said to the guy, take up your bed and walk, the first thing he did was he grabbed his bed and he made a move to get up. Other people's faith and the Word of God, or your own faith in the Word of God, is of absolutely no benefit if you don't take the immediate corresponding action. That's the number one reason that people will go to hell. They heard the truth, they were convicted, and then they didn't take the action. Because you may never get to that place ever again in your life. So, glad to have you this morning.